I'm part of the SPARC Steering Committee, and I also run the local museum in Haliburton. It's my pleasure today to be moderating this session, talking about cultural spaces in unique places. And that really appeals to me because the museum where I work in Haliburton, we're all about using our space unconventionally. So really delighted to be able to introduce today Kendra Fry, who is on the screen here, and this is really exciting because this is the only session where we're Skyping someone in. So thank you, Kendra, for expanding our technology horizons for this one. So Kendra is an advisor with Faith in the Common Good, which is a national interfaith network which was founded in 2000 on the belief there are diverse faith congregations and spiritual communities can be powerful role models for the common good. And I'm sure Kendra's going to talk a bit more about the work that they do. And she's going to be talking in conversation with Laura Montgomery, who is a senior program advisor with the Department of Canadian Heritage. And they're going to be talking about unique ways that we can use buildings in our community to use them as cultural spaces. So I'm really excited to see where this conversation is going to go. We're going to have a bit of a chance at the end of the session to round up some ideas to take back in terms of facilitation, things to share back with Myra and the facilitation team. So things for you to be thinking about during the session. Links to the theme of the conference, which again is translation. Some of the big ideas that have come out of this discussion. Action items, what you want to take back to your community and what you want to implement, what got you inspired, and links to the larger work of SPARC and the way that moving forward, SPARC may be able to help implement some of these ideas, or maybe programs that we can help facilitate moving forward. So get your thinking caps on, because I know there's going to be a lot of meaty stuff here, but I'm going to hand it over to our fantastic presenters. So take it away. If there's anything you need, well, let me know.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Laura, are you behind me?
I'm actually to your right.
Okay.
Over here.
When I read your presentation, I think it makes sense for me to start and then you to go, because you can give the context of the how and I can talk a little bit about the why. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, and for what it's worth, your presentation is already up, so you're right on our wavelength.
Okay, so do you have a great big beautiful basilica with a whole bunch of pretty lights on it?
Yes. You just tell us when to go ahead and I'll tab it forward here.
All right, sweet, so we're good to go. So first of all, I'm located in Toronto, and Toronto is the traditional unceded territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of New Credit, and many other nations. The United Church wishes to acknowledge that the nations cry out for justice, and it's our job to aid them in that search. So, and I think Laura will do hers when she gets hers. So some of you already know me, so hi friends. But for those of you who don't, I'm Kendra Fry. Some of you may know me as the past general manager of Cahoot's Theatre Projects, or Theatre Passmarai. Currently, I'm the general manager of Trinity St. Paul's Centre for Faith, Justice and the Arts, located here in Toronto, as mentioned. And I'm also an advisor on community collaborations for Regeneration Works. So Regeneration Works is a project of the National Trust for Canada. If you can go to slide 2 there, it'll tell us a bit about the National Trust. And Faith in the Common Good. So the National Trust is a not-for-profit dedicated to providing tools and training to heritage site owners. Go to slide 3. Faith in the Common Good is a national non-sectarian not-for-profit that's interested in where faith communities can enhance the common good. So where faith communities connect with communities at large and create things that are bigger and better than just either of the two. So the common good, the good of the commons. Commons, broken down in Latin, is com, together, and unus, one. Therefore, together is one. Our good friend Wikipedia, which incidentally is commons as well, defines a common as cultural and natural resources accessible to all members of society and managed for individual and collective. So I chose Wikipedia specifically because it included cultural and natural resources. I think that's really what we're talking about today when we're talking about a commons. So I'm going to say this one again. Cultural, natural resources accessible to all members of the society, managed for individual and collective benefit. Does it sound like a familiar idea? It should. Many people are beginning to question the validity of an oil-driven capitalist economy based on eternal growth. New movements, which in fact I would argue are old movements, are stirring. Notably land trusts, co-op living systems, sharing economy. I imagine you've all been involved in these kind of things lately the government, both provincially and federally, has begun to talk of some of these ideas, only they're expressing them as hubs. So community hubs, cultural hubs, innovation hubs. They're all hot topics. They're on the tongues of politicians counting these days. But I propose that essentially they're all the same thing. They're places where people gather to exchange ideas and enrich their worldview while practicing their particular specialty or exercising whatever their amateur enthusiasm might be. So Heather Menzies, in a really fantastic book, which I hope since you're all in the library you'll check out later, Heather Menzies, in Reclaiming the Commons, argues for a need to recognize the many existing sites, institutions, and community projects as possible commons-like habitats that can be co-produced by people through the activities that they are involved with. In other words, we don't need to create hubs. We just need to invest in the ones that already exist. We need to invest in ourselves. We could reset our story, realign ourselves with old ways of thinking, and do a reset, a course focused on people and community, using the resources that we already possess. So I come to you today with an invitation to be a part in this reclaiming of the commons, the remaking of places where we can gather to create, dream, test, and imagine how to move forward or backward, as the case may be. Now more than ever, the arts needs to place itself at the center of the dialogue, not separate in our own professional arts creation enclaves, but messily in the middle of this societal shift. New slide. So 2 quotes here. Without the stories, the land turns into real estate. So this is Mark Abley, spoken here, Travels Among Threatened Languages, another really great book. And Jane Jacobs, New Ideas Need Old Buildings, Life and Death of American Cities, which I'd imagine you've all read before. So the land turns into real estate. That's in fact the danger right now. The things that we once held dear, our schools, our churches, are becoming real estate to be disposed of in our rush for efficiencies. They're no longer a part of what defines and centers our community. They're no longer the gathering places. Incidentally, in Toronto here, people imagine Toronto is quite large, but I live in a neighborhood, and my house is 3 doors over from the school. And that school is the center of our neighborhood. That's where all things are made and met and come together, is in the exchange of children, the picking up of people from the schoolyard. Arguably, this shift is being felt most deeply in rural society, where these spaces, the churches and schools, may have been the last standing third spaces. A place to gather, which is neither work, home, is a third space, a neutral place, a place where everybody's ideas welcome. New ideas need old buildings, Jane Jacobs, Life and Death of American Cities. I believe the arts has always known this, as evidenced by the Blythe Festival Theatre, which is resident in an old town hall, Theatre Passmarais in an old bakery and stable, or the Belfry Theatre inside a church. But in talking a few weeks ago with the Cultural Funders Network in Toronto, we talked about the need to seize the day for the arts, to turn the societal change into an opportunity to create dynamic, engaged, community-based spaces for the arts, both professional and amateur in practice. This is a major shift away from the way that we have treated the arts in Canada and the US for the past 50 years. Creating buildings that were specific for the needs of those things, treating them as specialized events to be gone to show up in your best finery. But I think the shift is necessary if we're to recenter ourselves in community-based approaches. Next slide. And tea. And yes, upset day, we're upside down. It's not your vision. How's the sound? Are we okay?
It's been a little bit of chopping in and out, but for the most part, we're good.
Probably not something I can fix by leaning in, but somebody give me a big, broad signal if you can't hear me anymore. So, assumably, this is Walmer Road Baptist Church. Looking like that? Yes? Up in my slideshows? Good. Awesome. This is Walmer Road Baptist Church at Bloor and Spadina in Toronto. The image is cut from the Conseillière's real estate website, where it went up for sale last week. Last night around midnight, I received notice from a church who I was meant to meet with next week. It too went up for sale. Why does this matter to you? Because there's a theater in Walmer Road Baptist Church, a 200-seat theater that's been well used for decades by the Fringe and Summer Works. Ince Choi of Kim's Convenience fame workshopped his last play there just this last summer, and by September it will be gone. In addition to its place as a theater, it also holds one of the largest food banks in the city of Toronto that's easily accessible to downtown residents, which is an unusual thing. There are 27,000 faith buildings in Canada, and 9,000 will close in the next 7 years. A product of this great societal shift we are in. And for the most part, we've ceased to define ourselves as churchgoers. And I use that term carefully, for I think there's ample evidence that as people, Canadians don't imagine themselves as less spiritual. They simply don't attend church anymore. The United Church is closing churches at the rate of 1.5 a week. And many of these spaces have been home to the arts community for decades. Next slide. This is Trinity St. Paul's Centre for Faith, Justice, and the Arts, where I work. One of my jobs. It's 1 block away from Walmer Road Baptist Church. Last year, it hosted 483 community groups, including some 223 who identified their primary work as art creation. It's mostly a music venue with anchor tenant Tapa Music Baroque Orchestra, who you might be familiar with from all of their much work all over the world, including touring to Versailles every other year. But it's also home to theater companies and a massive social dancing community, including salsaholics, English country dancing, Morris dancing, and Dancing with Parkinson's. So on the upper right-hand corner there, you see a slide of Dancing with Parkinson's. So this is a project in collaboration with the National Ballet for Canada. Parkinson's sufferers come every week, and along with York University, their brains are scanned on site at Trinity St. Paul's. And then they dance for an hour and the brains are scanned again. So the dancing is social interaction, connection, and exercise, but the scanning proves that in fact it's changing the structure of the brains. People who are taking part in these programs are slowing the degenerative nature of Parkinson's disease. Art changes lives in ways that we can't even imagine. Trinity St. Paul's is a messy, multi-generational collision of community in which 4-year-old fiddle players regularly run into Tapa Music Baroque Orchestra on their way to their classes. It was created by the efforts of many people of singular vision, collaborating across sectors, and including the arts, faith, social justice groups, and the local annex community working in tandem. It's fully reproducible, and it's a model that I think would enrich both the arts and the community at large. This community hub model, or one like it, is what I'm inviting you to co-create. Now, I come from Goderich, Ontario. Spent 7 years working for the Live Festival Theatre, so I'm well aware that having gotten this far into the top, featured only Toronto-centric projects, I'm starting to get some side-eye. The model of the churches rebuilt as community and cultural hubs is fully scalable. And I'm about to show you some examples from across the country in the United States, both. Demise of faith has created an opportunity to revitalize these centers, which, after all, were built as common gathering places for the community. But some of this revitalization has required a reshaping and a reimagining of the narrative of these places. Their stories have to be told differently. Much of this rewriting has included governance restructuring as well, which has decentralized responsibility for these spaces and reactivated the vision of them as a commonly held trust for communities at large. So as we go through some examples, wherever possible, I'll discuss the governance shifts that have run community activation and involvement. Next slide. So a brief discussion of the depth of the challenge. So as I mentioned, 30% closure rate of faith buildings in the next 5 to 10 years. And that this is speeding up, not slowing down. That statistic's from 4 years ago, and I think it's getting faster. As attendance at religious services have declined, so have congregant contributions, and in many cases, the small groups that are left at the center of these religious communities can no longer possibly carry these massive buildings. Trinity St. Paul's is 44,000 square feet. Walmer Road is 60,000. There's a lot of real estate to carry. I should take a moment to say that I'm in a unique position working at Trinity St. Paul's. I work for the United Church of Canada in a position whose purpose is to encourage collaboration and collection with all things non-faith. I have no responsibility for faith matters at all. So I cannot speak to why religion has declined in Canada, nor do I speak for the United Church at all in regards to matters of faith. However, with Faith in the Common Good, I do work with faith groups and community groups across Canada to create new community and cultural hubs that reduce isolation, increase connection and support, and amongst many things, they support the arts. In this work, I've learned that even those who do not identify with a faith tradition still often identify with the importance of the faith buildings in their community. Next slide. So from a faith group perspective, they're under intense pressure to sustain their mission. Sale or development potential in urban areas is true, but it's limited in rural context. The age and the capacity of congregations to carry the buildings, the age is rising, it's falling naturally. And there's an emotional and financial complexity involved in these buildings. Next slide. However, for many people in the community, these churches seem to be a part of the landscape of home. We were recently in Peterborough working with the municipal government, heritage advocates, and faith communities there. We stood in the center of downtown Peterborough early in the morning before our 7 a.m. start and realized that we were surrounded by church spires. When we met with the groups that day, half of those spires were closing in the next 3 years. And since we were there a year ago, 2 have closed already. On slide 9 there at the bottom, there's a reference to the HALO projects. The HALO project is basically a large database that applies an algorithm to identify the impact of faith communities within our communities at large. So it measures things like places for the homeless and food banks and counseling services and low-cost places for the arts and for community gatherings. And nationwide, the multiplier is 4.7 times. So for instance, Trinity St. Paul's has a budget of just over $1 million. And community impact, the government would have to replace if it was gone, is 4.7 million annually. So the impact on available community space, as well as the geographic landscape of Peterborough or of any town to which it's happening, is massive. So those who are not drawn to faith are aware of the importance of these buildings. They were created at a scale that we're not likely to ever invest in again. This is where regeneration works comes in. Next slide. Hopefully you're looking at our partnership goals here. Okay. So we're announcing the press and Faith in the Common Good. The goal is to foster a dialogue, heritage,
Oh, we picked up an echo.
Yep.
Well, I don't know what I can do, but let's just.
It's like, what's amazing is Peter stepped in as that echo happened. Like, it was,
I'll try it. Just try it again there.
yeah.
Foster a constructive dialogue.
That's better.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That was weird. Okay. The goal is to foster a constructive dialogue between heritage advocates, faith communities, and the larger community who has an interest in faith building sustainability. So we offer resources to help faith groups use their buildings as part of a larger strategy to survive and thrive, but also to be better connected members of their community at large. We try to inspire successful adaptive use in the case that the faith community cannot continue to be present there. We try to keep these living cultural centers and landmarks at the center of our communities. Next slide. Let's look at some examples. So first up here we have the Highland Arts Theatre. So we are in Sydney, Nova Scotia. And on the left-hand side there you should be seeing a production of Heart of Steel by Wesley J. Culford. It's a former Presbyterian church. It was converted in 2014 and it features music, film, and theater. So the church left in 2014. They felt they could no longer carry it. And it was, I'm not sure what the deal of the sale was. I'm actually just getting in contact with them. And if anybody present knows more about these things than I do, just put up your hand because I haven't seen every last one of them. And this one I have not seen. So it was sold to this not-for-profit who is now running it as an arts center. And when I looked on their website, we're talking like 3 and 4 events a week of music and film and dance and theater that are happening year-round in Sydney, Nova Scotia. Interestingly, when I gave my talk at the Professional Association of Canadian Theatres Conference in Ottawa 2 weeks ago, two guys from Nova Scotia approached me after and said that it was one of their friends who purchased this theatre, and they gave me the really fantastic news that the church has gotten over their wounds and has come back and asked Highland Arts Theatre if they can celebrate their services there on Sunday, and they're now renegotiating for the church to rejoin the Highland Arts Theatre Centre, which I think really is the best of all possible worlds for everyone. But I can imagine that at the moment of passing it over to the church community, felt like they couldn't envision them having seen what it adds to the community. I think it probably gave them the opportunity to imagine. I was excited to hear about that, and I look forward to following up and seeing where they're at. Next slide. Kingsbridge St. Joseph Community Centre. Okay, do we have any Southwestern Ontario folks there? Blythe, Goddard, where are you from?
Minto.
Got it.
Harrison, Palmerston.
I know where Minto is. I'm from Goddard. I'm good. So Kingsbridge is just north of Goddard along Highway 21. It's not a village. It's a whistle stop. It basically has this cathedral, the rector house next to it, and a former Catholic school. The Catholic school closed about 15 years back. And this community defined itself 100% as Catholic. Irish Catholic moved to that region together and has been there ever since, and thus this very large church. But back just about 3 years ago, the Catholic diocese identified that they could no longer support a priest in this parish. And the parish, interestingly, had 300 members in the congregation, including some 60 members in their youth company. And so because of that, they were asked to go into local Goddard, which is not far, it's 20 minutes. But it's far culturally, strangely. It's a different kind of world. And so they were asked to go into Goddard to worship, and their response was, no, I don't think so. And they started a large community effort, an advocacy effort, and eventually purchased this cathedral from the diocese for $1, and then raised $225,000 in the next 18 months to renovate it and bring it up to code. And they're now running it as a community center in the church, and then next door in the rectory, it's a vacation home, because this is right on Lake Huron for people visiting in the area, a nice little 6-bedroom farmhouse for people to go and stay. So out of this church, they run card playing and dancing, they do theater, they do concerts. Theater-wise, this past week, they had their entire month's calendar was filled with play practice, as the entire community put on Kingsbridge, the musical, which they wrote to reinvigorate their sense of self and their sense of community and their history and story. So it's a pretty cool example, and Jennifer Milk, who's been at the center of this, has also been serving on many of the studies about community hubs that the government has been doing. So. Sorry, my child just walked in. Are you all right? And go away. Sorry. Next slide. This is the spire at Sydenham. So Kingston, Sydenham United Church identified that they had a great number of community members who were using their center, their church, as their community center. And eventually they decided that they wanted actually to invigorate that and to give those people the opportunity to have a say. So 2 summers ago, I went and worked with them, and we developed a memorandum of understanding which split their governance structure so that the church is now separate from the building, and the building's governance is run by a joint community and church board that has equal representation from both parts, so that the community who uses it for all kinds of activities has say over what happens in this building. So what happens now is the church does what it does, and then the community side runs the building. So it markets it, it brings in the money, it ensures the upkeep. The church still pays the same amount in that they were paying before to the upkeep, but they're able to reach many more broad sources of granting and community dollars in order to keep this place running for the many people who call it home. So on the right-hand side, there's the Blue Canoe Youth Theatre Company, just one of the many companies that calls it home. There's also a small film festival and several music organizations that operate out of the spire. Next slide. Are we on the Mary Webb Center?
Yeah.
This one, I don't know as much about as I would like to, so I need to go and see them. So in 2010, this church was up for sale and was purchased by the community and turned into the Mary Webb Center in a little town called Highgate. And I think Highgate is super small. I think it's less than 1,000 people was my memory of this. And so they're running it mostly as a music center, doing 1 or 2 concerts a week with more focus, obviously, around holiday seasons, you know, around Christmas and around the summer. It seems to be quite successful, and I look forward to hearing more about how it's doing.
Yeah, for what it's worth, Kendra, I can add a little bit too.
Please do.
They've been through the Cultural Spaces Fund, so we can share a little bit more about them. They also run art workshops through the week. They have a gallery space there, and they have yoga classes. There's all kinds of community use of it through the week as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've been at it a little while, so they seem to be a going concern. It seems to be working. Next one.
We had tried to connect with them to be part of this panel too, actually.
I know, they're really busy, which is good. Right? So you should be looking at Flick the Switch Arts Collective.
Good.
So there's 3 pictures of art, but your picture is covering what might be a lower left name.
This is the Flick the Switch Arts Collective, and it's at St. Mark's and Epiphany Church in Parkdale. I brought it in as an example because I just thought it was really cool. So a woman was looking for a place for a visual arts collective, and so she rented a quite large amount of space from this church, and there are now 9 artists who are operating out of it as a studio. And on the weekends, it's open and available for sales and such, but the rest of the time, they're doing all of their various creation things. So there's architects and digital design and paint and pottery and all kinds of things operating out of this one. Next slide. This is Leith Church. Leith is up near Owen Sound, so up the Bruce Peninsula. This one's been going for a very long time, and so it's an interesting governance model because the people of Leith wanted to keep the church as a community center available to them, but the Leith community is mostly a summer community, and so the United Church could no longer support keeping a church there year-round, but the people who were the cottagers in the area asked if they could take it over. So they devised a governance structure where the Friends of Leith run the church, and they do a great deal of musical events out of it. So you can see the banner on the top, the Leith Summer Festival, is actually from the advertising Roxy Theatre, which is in nearby Owen Sound. So the Roxy runs their box office for them. And the Leith Summer Festival runs on weekends for the entirety of the summer. And the way it works is that it's what's called a 2-point charge within churches. So the nearest local church has charge of this one as well. But basically they allow Friends of Leith to run it. And Friends of Leith pays into that local church. And when they've got to the point where they've paid for the full upkeep, which they always do apparently, then the rest of the money is put into a fund that goes into next year's Leith Summer Festival. So it's run on a break-even basis by volunteers basically, but it seems to be pretty fundamental for people. Interestingly, so Leith is the church where Tom Thompson was rumored to be buried, which we now know as of last summer was not, but has been a large tourist draw at years. Next slide. Back to Toronto, briefly. This is Leaside Church and Eastminster United. I show you Leaside because this model of circus centers is really popular. You might have noticed the rise recently of circus arts as another variety of art that is being created in Canada a lot, and it's hard to find spaces with enough height and enough beam strength for circus arts. And let me tell you, 90% of the churches in this nation, if they were built more than 80 years ago, have both enough height and enough beam strength to be resident for circus arts. So this is just one of many that are operating like that. Interestingly, Leaside as well just amalgamated with another church. It sold one of their buildings, and it's just at the beginning of a consultative process working with us in which they are going to create a whole new center intentionally for the arts. So they're going to be building using some of the money from the sale of the other church at Leaside in order to enhance the options for people in their community. Eastminster on the right is located right on the subway in downtown Toronto. It's at Chester Station, and it is mostly used for film, but I give this example here of the small theater because it's used a lot by community groups for recitals and things Next slide. You're looking at Église Saint-Pacon?
Yes.
This has nothing to do here, but it makes me really happy. This is a new model. This is all about food security. And so this small area in Quebec had identified that they needed more fresh food and more food security. And the church was no longer wanting to use its main sanctuary. So the church moved to the small chapel that's adjacent. The sanctuary is now a hydroponic garden that is growing food year-round for the community. And I just think it's awesome. I think it's really a cool model and is a good use of all of that height and space they have there. Next slide. So this is Dominion Chalmers United Church and Carleton University and there are so many people in here. So Dominion Chalmers is in Ottawa. It's 55,000 square feet. It's been there for 145 years, but the congregation is now down to 30 people. So after a long process of discernment, they elected to sell their building to Carleton University's Department of Music. So I've been working with them for just over a year now, and what is intended, help us if we all pull all the bits together, Carleton University's Department of Music will be there, so will the Ottawa Symphony Orchestra, Chamber Music Fest, Ottawa Children's Theatre, Little Theatre, the Ottawa Public Library, and the church. So right now we're just figuring out how to make the sanctuary as flexible as possible for all those needs, and then usage patterns of who will be where, and how we do the box office, shared services, and all of that. But I think what's really fantastic about this is that the church gets to remain resident, so they have sold it to Carleton University, and they'll be paying a lease amount for the space that they will lease back. But the building is just going to be filled with music and with people of all ages, and bringing the library in ensures that regular citizens have contact with art all the time. Next slide. This is the Interpretation Center for Rural Survival in Esprit Saint, Quebec. So in the 70s, you may remember there was a time in Quebec City where the government was saying that they couldn't support all of these little villages, and were encouraging people to come into the bigger centers and to shut down the villages. And this was one of the villages that said no. And they really put a lot of effort into staying in their community, and they focused that effort around their church. And they developed this mini museum basically out of the church, and it's the Interpretation Center for Rural Survival, and it has a whole walkthrough thing where you tour the history of what rural life in that area, where the people came from, and the changes in time, and the changing landscape of Canada away from rural and towards urban. The church is also still resident, still doing their thing on Sunday. Next slide. Tetre Paradox in Montreal. Tetre Paradox, this church, Notre Dame du Perpetual Secours, was sold outright to a not-for-profit, and the not-for-profit runs it as a social enterprise. And so they run events, weddings, and things out of it on a very ongoing basis, 3 or 4 times a week. But it is run by a professional team who has a shadow team of paid people who are underemployed or for various reasons have not been able to break into the employment market. And so they are taught how to technically run a show as well as how to run major events and run the money and all of that, the booking systems necessary for something of this scale. So I really love that connection to social enterprise and social good, which of course also allows them to access granting sources in order to keep the place running. And it's fully sustainable between that and the fees that are paid for the events. Next slide. It's the Indian River Music Festival in PEI. I'm going to find an excuse to get to PEI, and there's going to be the pregnant grant if you need it. So this is St. Mary's Church. It's still the church. This is in a very small community. It's really beautiful what they've done with it. So if you look on the left-hand side there, you can see that they've built that new section out front, but somehow it doesn't take anything from the original church. So that new section is what they use as their lobby and box office and donor area, but it's fully removable. So the historical aspects of this building are maintained. If they ever needed to remove that and return it to its original state, they could. So the church was going to close down. This is, I believe, 15, 20 years ago. And so they started running little summer music events, just little one-off concerts. They were so hugely popular and were drawing tourists from all over the area that they eventually separately incorporated that as the Indian River Music Festival. And so it now runs for 4 weeks straight every summer. This summer's lineup just looks amazing. People from all over Canada, major headliners are coming to play there. And I recently, when I was at PACT, I ran into someone who works with the Charlottetown Festival. They let me know that the Charlottetown Festival is now also producing small works of theater and conducting workshops for young people out of here as a secondary satellite location. So I was really happy to hear that they expand vision. Next slide. So that's it on my case studies. I have like 50 more, so if you have questions after, I'm sure I have examples of it. Those are the ones I chose for today. So what does it take? Critical success factors for adaptive use. First of all, understandably, a reasonable planning period on both sides. If the church doesn't have 3 to 5 years of money left in which to spend the time thinking about it, then there isn't really the time to do necessary to make it a transition that works for everyone. And similarly, if the arts organizations or community members who are engaged in this don't have 3 to 5 years to get where they're going, it's probably too fast. You need team members experienced with heritage and faith buildings and experienced in talking with heritage advocates and helping them to see how to make these into living centers of culture and not getting caught in heritage freezing. It must be exactly as it needs community engagement. If the community isn't engaged in space, then you shouldn't be doing it. There are plenty of cases in which a church has been left for reasons that have caused deep and lasting harm to a community, and probably those ones should not be reinvigorated. We need to acknowledge. Interesting moment for that to happen. We need to acknowledge that not all stories are good stories, right? And so it has to be a place that people want to be. We need a values-based approach that looks at the symbolism of the space, that has a desire for public access, that respects the heritage features and is interested in the sustainability of it. It needs flexible governance structure. It needs people who are willing to consider things differently and bring all voices to the table in a way that allows for everyone to have some control over the outcomes. It needs a function that the building can accommodate with minimal intervention or reversible interventions, so that everyone can feel good about how the buildings are being treated. And it needs, obviously, a business model that provides income for ongoing maintenance. It's all fine and well to save a church, but it's no good to save it for 2 years, right? Next slide. So here's some of the examples of the government connections. Laura's obviously going to talk more about that. So in Quebec, the Religious Heritage Foundation has provided $425 million for 2,700 projects of adaptive reuse across Quebec. I was there last summer, and just the variety of uses and the amount of energy around them, with tourists coming to cheese shops and restaurants and libraries and art centers, all the churches. There's just a real respect for the fact that built heritage worth maintaining. Just needs new uses that more accurately suit where we're at right now. The Ontario Trillium Foundation has funded regeneration work study into factors for rural faith success. So I did that study 2 years ago and talked about what makes for success, both within rural faith and within faith with co-adaptive or adaptive use. The EDGE is the innovation arm of the United Church of Canada, and it's providing innovation projects to do, for faith and the common good, to do multi-year carbon footprint and energy benchmarking. So to reduce the impact of these projects, of these buildings, but also at the same time to provide that as a model for other people for how to reduce the carbon impact of their own buildings. The Anglican Diocese have been trying new ideas, notably in England, where if you go online and look up champing, church meets camping, it does seats as camping network all across England. So you might know that in England there's great populations of hiking, people's field, back areas, and everything. Out? Yeah, good. Here.
Yeah.
Save me.
Try again, maybe?
Try talking again. It's
Yeah. Is that any better?
The joys of the internet.
Church camping in the Anglican diocese in England, so people go up and camp and they go backpacking, and then they call ahead and book to stay at a church like one would at a hostel, and then they're fed breakfast in the morning, and they sleep in the church halls and fed breakfast in the morning, and on they go. And it supports the churches, but also provides a really interesting experience. And if it were me, I would be really happy because it saves me carrying the tent, which is always the heaviest thing. The Metcalf Foundation in Toronto recently funded us for a Leading and Learning grant, in which myself and Arts Build Ontario and Toronto Arts Council went to the United States to look at examples there of adaptive use and co-use, and to bring back some knowledge from that. So we'll present the results of that in Toronto next week, and a number of funders will be present at that as we try and look at how we come up with plans that help to keep these things central in our communities. And individual municipalities and heritage groups are bringing in regeneration works for day-long workshops on faith-based regeneration that involve social enterprise and social services and faith and leasing and all kinds of various aspects of community life. So we've done that in Peterborough, Calgary, Ottawa, and we have Kingston, Winnipeg, and Fredericton coming. Next slide. I think that's probably it. So what's next? How can you help? We need to create a database or directory of faith spaces seeking to share their spaces and then share that content. Right now, it is so scattershot. It is a bunch of sticky notes on the side of my desk, and it's just not helpful. Arts organizations need a warm introduction in order to create lasting trust and long-term relationships. So one of the things I learned shifting from my 15 years in the arts to working in a faith space is that different cultures have a different sense of time. And the arts is extraordinarily fast. Faith is extraordinarily slow. And neither is wrong, they're just opposite ends of the spectrum. And so very often these conversations get started, and without a friendly ear who understands both in the middle, the arts community ends up feeling like as if they're being stalled, and the faith community ends up feeling pushed. And both are just a result of speed and different approaches to speed. Funders need to stop shying away from faith buildings and acknowledge their place in the cultural ecosystem. The secular faith divide in Canada is here for a good reason, but there's reason right now to look at the buildings as separate from the idea of religion and envision how they're parts of the communities regardless of their religious status, depending of course on what kind of building it is and how it sits within its community emotionally and physically. And we need to work on governance structures that allow for community engagement in faith buildings combined with some control over outcomes. So I brought you some examples of that today, and I have many more examples from our work in the US, which I realized I didn't do any of today, so sorry. To another talk, I'll do those. Next slide. I think that's it from me. So thanks for listening. And we'll pass over to Laura to bring in a piece of, or if there's any questions here, I can take those too before we go to Laura either way.
Do we want to do questions at the end?
We can do questions now, that's fine. That'll give a chance to queue up the next one here.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions for Kendra? Yeah.
Is there any examples in Europe of how this is working? Because they seem to be a few years ahead of us and everything.
Yeah, hundreds. Yeah, everything you can possibly imagine, from full repurposes to skateboard parks and climbing gyms to art centers. I'm going to be in London am I cutting out again?
A tiny bit.
Okay. I'm going to be in London in July, and I'm seeing the Union Theatre there, who's fully resident inside a church, and they're running full-time as a theatre and a church, so we'll be going to visit with them. And then, as I mentioned, this church camping model that is all over England. So, yeah, there's a ton of examples, and I think after I come back this time, then I'll have the deck of Europe.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah.
This isn't a question, I just find it interesting hearing this, and I live in Vancouver, and I find my experience there has been the opposite, where there have been art spaces taken over by churches because the churches can run the space for free or cheaper, and we've actually lost spaces to do arts programming because the churches have taken over.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Vancouver is such an outlier. None of the work I do is in Vancouver for a couple of reasons. One, there's two things happening with faith in Vancouver. First is church planting. And so there's this new motion amongst the evangelical and Baptist in Vancouver that is attracting large crowds into those churches. And yes, recently a theater was taken over by a church under those circumstances. But also the second thing that's happening in Vancouver is that the attachment of faith communities to their building is not the same as in Central Canada. Mm-hmm. There's a real sort of backland thing. Churches are very often just walking away from the buildings and defining themselves completely differently. Mm-hmm. And so those two forces make Vancouver a complete outlier in this conversation for sure.
So clearly the examples, the case studies that you've shown were all more or less success stories. I'm curious, however, if any of the collaborative efforts between the church, the faith aspect, and the art spaces, were there any contrasting ideologies that ran into problems in any experience you've observed?
Interestingly, no. And that was when we did the Metcalfe tour. That was exactly what Toronto Arts Council was looking for. They were looking to see for examples of censorship of art in order to meet faith needs. And they asked that question time and again. We saw 18 different places at that time. And they continually got the answer that no, faith communities, leaders, strongly against censorship. To the point of several shows being done naked, or one having, Christ who was hung naked in the sanctuary as part of the show. The thing is that the faith communities who come forward to do these things are already on board on these kinds of ideas, or they don't come forward, right? And so not every faith community is the right one to do an arts community or co-use community. But if they're not right because of ideological ideas, they won't come forward anyways because they already know that, right? So, and also, I mean, Faith in the Common Good and the National Trust are pretty good at asking those questions early and helping to match people. And we work, in the US, we work with a group called Partners for Sacred Places, who has done over 100 of these throughout the United States. And the United States is arguably more strong in their religious approaches. They also are not seeing this issue in the way that do choose to do this. I'm not saying no religious community have to control the market, but the ones that are successful and they're yeah. Did you lose me?
For a sec. Yeah, last sentence there.
Alrighty, so we'll have the opportunity for some more questions at the end, possibly looking at how both of our speakers, their ideas come together and fuse, but I think we'll hand it over to Laura. Carry on.
Great. How's everybody feeling? Do we need to like stretch? Stand up if you need it. Pat a neighbor on the back.
Yep.
It's getting to that close to lunchtime.
Kendra?
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you, Kendra, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah, and sorry for the dropouts and things. Unfortunately, that's just Skype being Skype.
Yeah.
You kind of have to be just hope for the best, and I'm just impressed to stay connected the whole time. That's a victory right there.
Yeah. So my name is Laura Montgomery. I've met some people in the room here. I live, work, and play in what is the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation in part of the Robinson Superior Treaty, currently known as Thunder Bay, or Port Arthur and Fort William if you're from there further back. I have some information for you about the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. We touched on a lot of this stuff yesterday, but my intent today is to get a little more deeply into the stream of funding that has just opened up for creative hubs. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Really quickly, just to give you an idea, for people who like to know where things come from in the background piece, this is the history of the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. It was created in 2001. It was a source of my first real government job at that time. The objective of the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund is infrastructure improvement with the objective of improving physical conditions for artistic creation and heritage exhibition across the country in all communities, or in as many as possible. Improving access. So there are 3 types of projects that the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund supports. The first is building either renovation or new builds for arts and heritage facilities. The second is the acquisition and installing of specialized equipment related to your heritage or arts mandate. And the third is the development of feasibility studies towards those projects. There can be a mix of the first 2 together in a single project. That's totally fine and expected. Those are the 3 general things. So the expectation is that everyone has access to professional work facilities, and also experiences are available in a wide range. Again, about access. Eligible applicants are incorporated nonprofits. This is what I was talking about yesterday around lunch, so this is just repeating. Nonprofit organizations that are incorporated, and also government, municipal, provincial, territorial, First Nations, governance, Indigenous organizations, and their subsidiaries to arts and heritage programming. There is not a deadline. Applications are accepted as you get them ready. To go back a step, this new stream for creative hubs also includes as eligible incorporated nonprofit organizations that are operating creative hubs. So because the Department of Canadian Heritage has the culture mandate, it's the creative hubs that is this department's angle in on what I agree with Kendra is really just hubs. So here's an idea of the budget of the program. It has not very much money for an infrastructure program, to be honest, but this new stream of funding for creative hubs is that additional $300 million over 10 years, just starting now. So it's made a lot more dollars available. And here are your maximums for the project. The first one reached either 50% of total eligible project costs, or $15 million for construction renovation, $5 million for specialized equipment, or $500,000 for a feasibility study. And this is for the super eggheads. You can't have more than 100% government support for your project. So we've talked about this a little bit, but just an interesting piece about the Cultural Spaces Fund is that it has some objectives, some priority communities. So what you're seeing in that first bullet is the priority groups as far as applicants and project benefits. So in circumstances where organizations that are belonging to any of those priority groups apply, in those cases, sometimes cultural spaces can go up to 75% of their project budget. In case you'd like to know how it shakes out, this is how the arts versus heritage. Yeah. And there are a couple of examples of funded cultural spaces projects. So here it is, again, for people who like to know the details of where these things come from. Budget 2017 announced that new funding, mainly for creative hubs. And again, it's about collaboration, and now we can get into a little bit more of the fine details of it. So really, this is the key points. What cultural spaces, in writing your application, what they'll be looking for is shared space and resources, exchange and collaboration opportunities built into your management structure, and also public access to the space. And as I mentioned yesterday, the key difference between the Creative Hub stream of funding and the Cultural Spaces funding and the other funding is, in this case, your tenants and users can include for-profit organizations and people who operate a business. They do not necessarily all have to be either arts or heritage oriented. And we'll get to that. So this is the paragraph that public servants all together, got their heads together, and came up with as a definition for creative hubs. So essentially, it's just bringing together a diversity of arts and heritage professionals and creatives, opportunities for shared space, access to equipment, and collaboration, and public access for full programming. Everybody get a chance? Okay. In the context of cultural spaces, here are some examples of those creative disciplines that can be included: architecture, craft, product, yeah, any kind of design. So here is what will be assessed in your application. So when you, because it's so much fun, go to the Department of Canadian Heritage website and pull up the guidelines and application forms for the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. About 35 pages into it, there's the assessment criteria. It tells you how your application will be assessed. The Creative Hubs specifically have some additional assessment criteria, and these are them. So what you're seeing here is what Linda and I will be assessing when your application comes in. So bringing together professionals from a range of sectors and creative discipline, diverse business models, so not-for-profit, for-profit, self-employed creatives, provide affordable shared space, equipment, amenities, supports, opportunities for collaboration like we've talked about already, and space and programming that's accessible to the public. Please know that, and really importantly, in the context of smaller communities, your application is reviewed in the context in which the project will be operating. So your project in your community of 4,000 people will not be assessed against a project in downtown Toronto with all of its stakeholders and potential access to stakeholders and participants and members. What will be examined is how you're engaging your community, how you're keeping creatives in your community and giving them a space, and how that's gonna benefit the public.
Does there have to be like any proof of like you're already kind of doing it to
Yeah.
prove that? Okay.
So there does need to be a programming history. So that's a really good question. In order to be eligible for the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund, generally you need to have 2 years in operation, so doing programming at a professional level too. So in the case of museums, also something that's an important thing to know is the museum needs to have at least one paid staff, and they need to offer services all year round. You don't necessarily need to be open all year round, but you need to offer services all year round, so people can come and do archival research or photograph and things.
So just on the note of like, so let's say it's like a cultural hub that has many different activities and artistic disciplines happening there. I mean, how do you, like, does that mean if there's theater happening there, it has to be professional theater performances? Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't, well, in terms of programming, it could just be like outreach programming too. So if you're doing classes for kids or something like that, that would engage the public and bring them in. And if you have something like, maybe it's not a fully fledged production that you're putting on there, but you do workshops or readings that are accessible to the public.
I'll talk to you right now.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Does the staff person have to be there year round too?
Not necessarily.
So you could have a
But they should
seasonal
be-
person and then volunteers.
You could, generally they would be accessible year round even if the space isn't open. Just because in order to offer services, you need to have someone for people to access. Yeah. So there you go. To get a little deeper into what they're looking for in terms of diversity of discipline, sectors, and people, I feel like we're giving more information that is hopefully helpful here. So you may have organizations from other sectors that co-locate, you might have a retail space, you might have maybe a cafe, you might have something, a variety of services offered or organizations located. Hi, Ken. There you go. So by design, they're multi-tenant facilities, but they're intended, they facilitate in their construction and their operation interaction. So one of the questions in the application is how do you facilitate interaction or collaboration among your tenants? And so that would be something to really think about in developing your operating model is how are we doing this? Is it once a week we have a touch base and everybody who's part of it is invited and we just over coffee talk about what everybody's projects are? Do we have something more structured than that where we have, you know, a participatory project that we're all working on, that we're all contributing to? So to be thinking about those models and how that would take shape.
Does the Creative Hub have to be one building, or in a community, can it be more than one building?
That's a really good question. And I don't have a solid answer for that yet, so I'll go back and ask the question.
Because in our case, we've got a community of makers, and it's the library, it's the college, it's the radio station.
Yeah.
They're already together as a
collaborative.
Collaborative, so.
My question would be then, in terms of cultural spaces, what would be the project you would be looking at doing? Because if it was something like, we would like to have this kind of equipment that we can make available to all of our member groups, then, probably part of it would involve some kind of shared space where that would be stored that people could access and that would provide that. But I think, like my read on this, and again, because this is so new, we're still learning too, so you're learning as much as we know right now, my inclination would be to think that because you need to be able to offer public programming, they might be looking for one space, but if it's like a multi-site.
Well, all of them provide public programming.
Yeah, exactly. So that question is still, that's answered there. Yeah, it's a good question. I'll check it here. And you know what, I'll try and send it back to SPARC because you're not the first person to ask that question, so it's a really good one. My instinct would be to say there would have to be a shared space to have the equipment at least, so that might be your shared space right there. But I'll confirm that. That's just me. So here we are again, exchange and collaboration. You might have shared training or professional development, social activities. Bring everybody together. So here's the public access. This might include events, exhibits, workshops, lectures, live performances, workshop performances, collaborative art making. You could probably come up with a way longer list. And I have one example because Kendra is super thorough with examples, but this was the one that they shared with us from headquarters. So we're back in Cape Breton, New Dawn, which is a former convent, sorry. And what's interesting to me is the first floor of the building is dedicated to collaboration spaces and office spaces for those outside of arts and culture. So they have dedicated activities that are in space outside of culture. They have Meals on Wheels in there, they have non-governmental organizations, and VR meeting facilities. And they have subsidies, they provide subsidies to artists, that's fantastic, up to $50,000 per year. Yeah, so there you go. And again, you see like yoga and exercise classes regular. So they're balancing it, which I think is a really important thing to think about in a more rural or remote context where maybe we don't have the critical mass of artists to make this a go. But when we work with these other organizations, it makes it viable.
If I can add into that, Laura, I think that's the thing that makes Hub better is when there's more aspects, right?
Yeah.
I really think that we've made a mistake separating our artists and notably differentiating professional from amateur without understanding that's part of the spectrum of learning, right? So I think these things are better when everybody's together across multiple platforms and levels of understanding.
Yeah. And it really taps that notion of commons you were talking about too.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I can move Kendra and then you can see my phone number if you want it. But this is Linda. She works out of Sudbury. So, and we both work in cultural spaces. So I'm just the talking head. There are two of us. And we're very friendly, I think. Oh, I'm not able to.
Yeah, move off to the right of the screen. And
Okay, then I'm over. There.
Fury.
Sure. Well, I can tell it to you because you're probably writing it down. Anyway, the phone number is 437-991-7920.
Hey, ta-da.
If you were applying
as a hub, like maybe with multiple organizations partnering on a project, could multiple organizations be co-applicants, or would you need to incorporate as like a separate entity or an ad hoc group to apply together?
You need to either incorporate as a separate entity or have a lead applicant that's going to take the lead on the management end of the facility. Yeah, this program's not ready yet for more than one applicant.
Yeah, for sure.
Does anyone else have questions for Laura or for Kendra?
Personally, I'm jumping in, but I'm really excited about this. Just when they were flashing the big objectives of this event about community sustainability and also opportunities for reconciliation, I think there's some really great openings that a creative hub can fill. Yeah.
I'll just say some context to your question, but in North Bay, we are looking to put a hub together, multiple organizations, arts and culture organizations mainly, but also there's some periphery, for-profit artisans, and so this kind of feels like it really fits. We've been approached by a local developer who's really interested in potentially supporting that, but we're a little weary to work with them, to be honest, because it's about the trust and it's about, and I know that there are some protections in place that are built within Canada cultural spaces, like a 10-year lease. But do you have any other maybe stories or recommendations or, advice in approaching somebody that, seems to have good intention, but that's a lot to put in? He would still own the building. It's a lot to really hand over to someone else. So.
Yeah, and that's a big act of trust too. And some groups I've worked with before have had buildings offered to them, and when they started to research it, they found that this is going to be a white elephant. We're going to have to put a lot into this building, and it's kind of this person, and it came from a good place to make the offer, but there's going to be so much work involved in that. So, and the way that was mitigated, like the way that was dealt with, was to do this study. Like we need to do, especially if you're talking about a big. So in cultural spaces, if you're making a request of $500,000 or more, you need to do a feasibility study. Yeah. So that's why this program supports the feasibility study level. So those kinds of questions get addressed in the feasibility study, and it gives you as the organizations the information to say, we've costed it out, we've looked at the risks involved, and we don't feel comfortable at this point, if that's what you need to say. And it also gives you the opportunity to have those hard conversations about how will this really look, and if this happens, and it involves a third party too, so then it's not putting the pressure on the organizations involved to have that difficult conversation or to lead that difficult conversation. Yeah.
And in terms of a feasibility study, you've actually never done one before, would that involve looking at multiple different locations or multiple different options? Yeah, and in fact, that would be something that would be encouraged too. It'd be like, if you were saying, we're only looking at this one building, then the question right away from cultural spaces would be, why aren't you looking at others? And you're great. Yeah, that makes sense.
Arts Guild Ontario can also provide some.
Fantastic. They have really great resources too.
Does anyone, do we have any other questions? Hi. Well, we can have a round of applause for our presenters who shared so much.